So without giving too much away, would you like to expand more about your novel? Because I've seen bits and pieces of it, but I'd like to let the audience know more about it. What exactly is the premise? You mentioned goblins, elves, and everything. And there's also a little something about a coin-shaped planet. So take it away, bro. What's it all about?
Sure, and the big thing in this story is actually based on that. The idea was basically, what if the Lord of the Rings version of the fantasy genre, where these victorious elves fight off a decrepit, decadent, corrupt goblin empire, and goblin empire is all uniform, and uh, they are also all uniform and such. What if that was just like how people look back and like they think how the sort of the Europeans thought of the Crusades after they happened. They thought of themselves as the noble people, and the Muslims and the Arabs as the barbarians and all that. What if that was just one person's way of looking at it? And so the idea is, there's this coin-shaped planet, and there is a city at the top of the coin-shaped planet that is a holy city, and it is special to different races for different reasons. Some for religious reasons, some for ethnic, or they believe it's where they originate from. But essentially, it's sort of the Mecca. You can think of it kind of, instead of doing tawaf, literally, you're always doing tawaf around that North Pole, right? So any people just sit in that holy place, and they pray, and they're always spinning around it anyway. So it's a little bit inspired by the idea of the tawaf, but and the idea of pilgrimage in general. And so basically, these three races, the elves, goblins, and dwarves, they have fought over it for 1,000 years for different reasons. And in the middle of that 1,000 years, a religion emerges where a dwarf who was a priest of these old stone gods that they used to worship, he rejects the stone gods, and he starts talking about the one way to the true God. And this is sort of a representation of how I imagine Islam if it was revealed to these races. And essentially, what happens is his faith becomes popular with one side of that big struggle. So the two sides of the coins are fighting each other, and it gets converted into an empire. And his faith becomes popular in one empire, and another empire, more secular, sort of similar to European empire, clashes with it. And eventually, this secular European, the fair elves, they end up conquering the whole coin. They end up taking it over, and then similar to what happened in our day and age, they overextended themselves, and they couldn't keep their control, so they eventually granted everyone their freedom. So it's very post-colonial. There's different nations now. There's goblin nations, there's dwarf nations, and there's still the fair elf nations, and there's also the dark elves. I shouldn't forget, the dark elves are very reminiscent of Africans, and they have their own sort of kingdoms that were very isolated and not connected with this whole war that was going on between the others. And so essentially, long story short, there's a kid, a goblin young man, who was born in this holy city. So now this holy city at the top was taken over by the fair elves, and they have decided to, very much a la South Africa, put everyone in their own little group. So the goblins have their quarter. The dwarves are pushed into the underground because, well, they're dwarves. That's what they should love. And the dwarves actually did not love this. So they kind of there was an invention upon them that these people need to be pushed underground. That's where they belong. They never belonged on the surface anyway. So each race has been given, and the fair elves are given a very nice, very verdant, wealthy part of the city, and then there's a middle space where the rock, the North Stone is, which is basically this meteor that has hit the North Pole, and it becomes very important. It has a specific importance to the plot later. But essentially, this young man, goblin, he's born. His name is Mizan. He lives in the city. He goes to school. He comes back from school, tries to find a job. He's failing at finding a job. He's failing at trying to get back with this girl that he used to like, who is a half dark elf, half goblin girl who has now joined the way that the priestesshood, or you could think of it like she's become an ustada. She's trying to become a religious teacher. They don't, it's not like a monk. They still get married and stuff like that. So he's trying to like he's trying to get in. He's interested in her. He's failing at that, failing at job. He pretty much just gives up and decides, he wants to do his own thing. And somehow the things that he ends up trying to do end up involving him in by accident, not by purpose, but by accident, he ends up involving himself in a big sort of environmental disaster that many people didn't know about, that was happening around his city, around this holy city. And he ends up getting in the middle of basically a religious conflict between the traditionalist mystics of the religion and these sort of very literalist, you know, we won't name names, but sort of similar to some type of people we have today. He gets in the middle of this religious conflict. He gets in the middle of this environmental conflict, and somehow he and his little group of friends who have reconnected since their childhood, they have to help, you know, fix this mess that is suddenly about to destroy the city.